voy a cantar esta canción con mucho cariño de mi corazón a la República Dominicana, la casa del merengue y la casa de la bachata.
Mejorar La Raza, which basically means better the race. So if you are in a situation where you fall into the darker category in the spectrum of color, you need to make sure that you are looking for a spouse that's lighter, because you need to better the race. You need to better the race. And people would give warnings like, no dañe la raza, don't mess up the race. So it's like, are you really going to date that person? And then, sometimes they would make allowances. Okay, their skin is a little too dark, but their features are, European, nose or lips or shape of face, texture of hair, right? Those things are like redeeming, qualities. So people would make allowances. Okay, well, if you're white enough, maybe, the kids will inherit these features and not the skin color. Or even if they do, it's like these terms come up like negra fina, morena fina, like that's a fine, you're a refined brown skinned person. You're a refined, a dark skinned person, whatever. But it's all from that whole ideology of Mejorar La Raza, which really was just a consequence of La Casta system. That's what it did. It created that environment where people knew, because we're being classified this way, this is how Spaniards are looking at us, how Portuguese are looking at us. So this is how all whites are going to look at us, especially when you start to have a relationship with the United States, right? So we need to find ways to make our race better, because obviously this is a disadvantage. It's a disadvantage. So it's like, this is the part that a lot of people don't get. How can you romanticize these relationships and say, no, we are a mixed population of people, we love mixing, we don't have this whole drama that you guys have out there in the US? But yet, do you see how your society was built to the point where a European man may have procreated or married a native woman or an African woman, and they had these children, but from the moment they're born, these children are told you're at a disadvantage because, let's say, one of them presented too dark. And this couple comes together knowing this. It's a dynamic where the darker person is made to feel like, I'm doing you a favor. You're in an advantage for being with me, and the kids are raised to think that way. And then people don't talk about sometimes how parents will favor or make another child feel more special because of how they look. And they pit siblings against each other. So it's like a lack of honesty there. People don't want to get deep into those subjects, but it happens and it's real. It's just this also code of honor that you're supposed to follow. Well, you never talk about your family and you don't talk about your people, no matter what. So you have all of these people with all this pent up trauma and hurt that you're not allowed to talk about because you can't give your family a bad name. You don't dishonor your parents. You don't talk about what they say or what they do. You don't dishonor your culture or your people. Keep that in-house. People, will even get mad at the fact that these topics are being spoken in a public forum. How dare you talk about that for everybody to hear from other races? We should be talking about that ourselves, amongst ourselves. So there's this like definition of loyalty as well that is just really warped because it's right at the expense of like truth, and nobody gets healed and nobody changes. But that's, Mejorar La Raza is it's really still, some people still subscribe to that. And they break it down to facial features, hair texture, and skin color. And, people are scrutinized. And then you have people that just, they don't care. Like, look, I fell in love with someone who looks just like me and they're Black presenting like me. So, and they believe this reality that's given to them that, well, you made the wrong choice, and they'll do that and say, I fell in love. And then they have to teach their children how to navigate that world as well, because it it is a reality that they're going to have to face a certain level of prejudice and racism that other people wouldn't experience. That's real, you know, but people they'll still do it because you know, but they do it with a sad, um, knowing the sad reality that because they made a decision to not, mejorar la raza, now their whole family is going to be treated a certain way. They're going to have these disadvantages. Their children are going to go through the same things that they went through. So it's a deep topic, and some people try to act like it
Yeah.
doesn't exist. I never heard of that. No, we don't do that. People are not honest about conversations that they have behind closed doors, and how people really think about things and people.
Yeah, no, you broken down really nicely. You went really, really deep on that because people cannot deny it any longer. It cannot be swept under the carpet. And this whole thing about do not tell the public about our internal family
Right.
country style, that's just a form of manipulation.
Mejorar la raza, definitely, it's a consequence of la casta system. And la casta system, the caste system that was established, it was created by Portuguese and Spaniards, colonizers. And they created this really so that they could always be in power. It was a way for them to keep control of the other races within the colonies. And the hierarchy was that, of course, Europeans were at the top, you know, and they called themselves peninsulares, basically because they were the ones that, came from directly from Spain or from Portugal, right? And then you have their children and their offspring. As long as they were strictly, excuse me, European, then they would be called criollos, right? And there was a hierarchy, there with that, making sure that the power was always with the so-called founders of leaders of this colony, and then you're looking at uh, Africans all the way at the bottom, and natives were above them, and that is what created and controlled, I'm sorry, that is what controlled the society. It was that system. And within that, there were these terms that were invented and pictures drawn, by Europeans to send back to Spain and Portugal to explain, what they called this new breed of people, right? That came about through these mixed relationships, whether if it was, a European person with a native person, a European with an African, or a native with an African. And what do you call that grandchild? What do you call that, great grandchild? So it was all these very offensive names like mulatto. Mulatto is one of them. Mulatto is a derogatory term, and mulatto is basically like a hybrid person. Not even it's an animal, the fusion, of two animals together. So it's very insulting, and it's like these zoological terms, sambos. That's a zoological term that was used to describe people. So this caste system was very much what controlled society. And then you go from having the colonizers calling people this to then even far, way after these nations, and looking at Dominican Republic, after they get their independence, still this terminology starts to be, it becomes mainstream, right? That's how the words like mulatto survived. Words like mestizo, they've survived. It was all part of the caste system that was established. And then, color coded society, which is what it really created, where people began to identify themselves, negro claro, basically like you're a light skinned dark person, right? Terms like negro lavado, literally a washed Negro. Like, who says things like that? But these were terms that were used. You know, you could be blanco sucio, dirty white. These were actual classifications that people wrote out to identify people. And even within that, you can hear the racism, and yet people will still say that racism doesn't exist. But people still use this terminology.
It needs to be talked about because a lot of people in Dominican Republic and dark skin, and you're growing up dark skin, you're growing up, people think that you're not good enough. That can affect your mental health as well. Because you're
Yeah.
always gonna think like you're not good enough. And that's not okay. It's a form of racism, and it's also abuse. I'm a dark skinned woman, but I thank God that I grew up in a culture and environment where my dark skin was never a question.
Mm.
I went through life not worrying about my dark skin because I never once thought my dark skin held me back because I didn't grow up thinking there was anything wrong with my skin. I've never had that issue because of my environment where I grew up in. And I thank God for that because I think God shielded me, protected me from those negative
Wow.
dark skin
Yeah.
vibes. So no matter what your color is, you are still a beautiful person because at the end of the day,
Right.
it's what's inside that counts. So thank you so much for breaking that down so nicely. Everybody give it up for
Thank
Pastor
you.
Johnny.
Thank you so much for watching until the end. Please like, share, and subscribe, and see all the other videos in this series.